So, if you're a creator, an entrepreneur, or really anyone who's deep in that tough, sometimes lonely, grind of building something from scratch, this is for you. Today, we're going to dive into the mindset of Steve Jobs to pull out 4 really critical lessons on resilience.
I mean, let's just start right there. What does it actually take? Because it's so much more than just a good idea, isn't it? It's the grit, it's all those late nights that are just fueled by coffee and hope. It's that relentless drive to keep pushing when it feels like nothing is going your way. That's the grind. And learning how to survive that grind, well, that's everything.
And you know, when you look for somebody who really mastered that grind, there are few people better to study than Steve Jobs. We all know him as the visionary, right? The genius. But underneath all that, his entire career is basically a masterclass in the art of the comeback. So let's just be clear on what we're talking about here. Resilience, for a creator, is just the ability to keep going. It's not about avoiding failure. Nobody does that. It's about what you do after you fail. It's about looking at the setbacks, the doubt, the sheer exhaustion of it all, and still making that choice to get back up and try again. So let's unpack how we build that skill.
All right, so lesson number 1, and this one's kind of surprising, the beginner's mind. It sounds totally backwards, right? The idea that completely failing, losing it all, could actually be your secret weapon.
Well, think about this. When Steve Jobs got publicly fired from Apple, the company he literally built in his parents' garage, it was a massive, public humiliation. That should have been the end of his story. But years later, he said it was one of the best things that ever happened to him. Why? Because the crushing weight of being Steve Jobs, the successful CEO, was just gone. He was free to be a beginner again. And that lightness, that freedom, is what led to Next and Pixar and kicked off one of the most creative periods of his entire life.
So what's the takeaway for you and me? It's this: don't be so afraid to look like you don't know what you're doing. The pressure to be the expert all the time, it just freezes you. The real magic, the real breakthroughs, they happen when you're foolish enough to just try stuff, to be curious, and to embrace that powerful beginner's mind. You know, this idea of embracing the process, especially the messy parts, it flows right into our second lesson, craftsmanship in the dark. This is all about the integrity and the care you put into the parts of your work that absolutely no one is ever going to see. And to really get this, you have to hear a story Jobs used to tell about his dad, who was a carpenter. When his father would build a cabinet, he'd make sure the back of it, the part that was going to be up against a wall forever, was made with the same beautiful wood and care as the front. Why? Because for him, true craftsmanship meant quality all the way through, even the hidden parts. And that's the reality for us too, isn't it? All that invisible work, the drafts you threw away, the code you rewrote 10 times, the endless tiny edits, that work is building more than just a project. It's building your character. Quality matters, because even when no one else is watching, you are. Now that level of commitment to quality requires something else. Maybe the most valuable thing any of us have, our time and our focus. And that brings us to lesson 3. Time is your currency. Look, every single person listening has a totally unique point of view, a weird mix of interests that nobody else has. That is your secret weapon. But the world is so loud, and it's constantly trying to get you to fit in, to follow someone else's blueprint. The lesson here is you have to fiercely protect your own inner voice. Guard that little spark you feel for your project like it's everything. Because this connects right to one of his most powerful insights. He said, your work is going to fill a large part of your life, and the only way to be truly satisfied is to do what you believe is great work. That belief, that feeling that what you're doing is great work, that's the only way to find real satisfaction. Okay, so you've got the beginner's mind, you're committed to craftsmanship, and you're protecting your time. But what's the glue that holds all of it together when things get really, really hard? Our last lesson, well, it might just be the most important one of all: persistence. Jobs was so blunt about this. He was convinced that about half, 50%, of what separates successful entrepreneurs from the ones who fail is just pure perseverance. Not a better idea, not more money, not being smarter, just the raw, stubborn will to keep going. It really is that simple. When you boil it all down, the dividing line isn't genius, it's grit. It all comes down to a choice you make when you're exhausted and full of doubt. One person keeps going, and the other decides it's just not worth it anymore. That choice, that's the separator.
And here's the mindset shift you have to make, the one that changes the game. It's supposed to be hard. The difficulty is the point. That famous dent in the universe that Jobs talked about, that doesn't happen on your first try. It happens on the 11th try, right after you refuse to give up after the 10th failure.
So we've gone through these 4 massive ideas: the beginner's mind, craftsmanship in the dark, time as your currency, and persistence. What's the one big thought, the core belief that powers all of them?
It all comes down to this one single radical idea. And it's maybe the most empowering thing he ever said. Everything around you that you call life was made up by people that were no smarter than you. And you can change it. You can influence it. Once you learn that, you'll never be the same again.
So once you really get that, once you realize you're not just living in the world, but you can actually be one of the architects, there's really only one question left. What will you change?